At this point in my life, I have relatives in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, so I had the opportunity to go to Cedar Rapids to visit my relatives. Aunt Betty, Uncle Joe on the farm, Uncle Ralph and Aunt Annie in the city, and Uncle Ralph had a cookie distributing district called Salerno out of Chicago, a biscuit company. And he did that by delivering cookies to all the little stores and all the little communities around Cedar Rapids. Very interesting. So anyway, I got to Cedar Rapids and got to stay with Uncle Ralph and Aunt Annie. They had a 2-story house, and I had a bedroom upstairs. And Teresa, the daughter of Uncle Joe and Aunt Betty, she lived in the city with Aunt Annie and Uncle Ralph, so she could go to high school. And Teresa was a dear, dear cousin of mine. Loved her dearly. And so I spent some time there. Instead of going back to California, I decided I had an opportunity to stay. So at that time, I decided I better get a job. So I got a truck driving job with Dad's Old Fashioned Root Beer. And that route was between Iowa City, the Amanas, northeast, west, south Amana, which is a German community, been there for years, and they have a woolen mill there, lots of restaurants, just really fine. So my job was to drive the truck, deliver Dad's Old Fashioned Root Beer. I'd go into the store or down in the basement, take all the empties, replace them with cases of good old Dad's Old Fashioned Root Beer, which was absolutely excellent. So I did that for quite a period of time. I don't know, if it was 6 months or more. But anyway, Uncle Ralph offered me to drive his panel truck around to these stores. And so he was teaching me how to do the sales. He introduced me as his nephew. And he had a unique way. Instead of saying, would you buy 3 cases this week, or we have a special, he would go to the shelf where his products were. He would replace them, mark the price on them, and then see the owner or manager and give him the ticket. That saved the owner and manager from doing all the work, so they really loved him. Plus, the quality of those cookies were just phenomenal. You can still order them, I guess, out of Chicago. So I did that for, I don't know how many months. And it became winter, a lot of snow, a lot of ice. And so I went down these icy steps one day and slipped and fell and went down these steps and really injured my low back. Uncle Ralph took me to Dr. Prout, was the quite famous doctor in not only the community but around Iowa. And so he worked on me, and it took several treatments, but I really was recovering nicely, so I could continue working and driving the truck. Dr. Prout, Aunt Annie, she was a great cook, and in fact, she was my godmother, and very strict female, and so we got along good, as long as I stayed out of crossfire. And she baked pastries called kolache. It's a round pastry with the center filled with some type of fruit, and when they bake those, they're gone in a few minutes. They're just, in fact, St. Wenceslaus Church does an annual, and they sell 3,000 or 4,000 kolache for a fundraiser for the church. It's just that famous. Anyway, one day and Annie also did rug weaving. And so one day she's coming down the stairs from the second floor carrying my World War II Eisenhower jacket. And she says, we're going to use this and we're going to weave it into a rug. I think that her brother, who was Uncle John in World War I in the infantry in France, brought back a lot of memories. And so this, I'm sure, triggered off some thoughts of how war really is. And so she figured that she would just get rid of that, and she did. Then, as things progressed, I accidentally overheard Aunt Annie and Uncle Ralph talking. And they said, you know, Dr. Prout is coming over to pick up Harvey Sunday to take him out to the airfield to see his airplane. And Uncle Ralph says, that is probably what's going to change everything. He's going to teach him things. And Uncle Ralph was very upset. And Uncle Ralph was right. Dr. Prout came, picked me up in his Cadillac, took me out to Hunter Airfield, and he had a Stinson Voyager and took me for a ride around the countryside. I took pictures, and we became friends. Unfortunately, that friendship then grew. Every Friday night, we would go out to the airfield because we had a hangar out there that we had a pilot's club. And so Iowa was a dry state, so you'd bring your own liquor that you bought from out of state, and they would set up a bar in the hangar and did have a few drinks. So Dr. Prout says, you're out of the Army and you have a GI Bill, why don't you get a pilot's license? See? So see how things happen? Well, that's exactly what happened. That was 1948. My first airplane ride was with an instructor from World War II. He's a fighter pilot off of a carrier. So I was getting first class instruction. So he said, we're going to climb up to 3,000 or 4,000 feet. I'm going to put the plane in an angle that we're going to fly up, and so it's called a power-on stall. And so it will go like this and then start falling, and I want you to take the stick, and when it gets to the horizon, I want you to pop that stick forward. So when it got down, I popped that stick forward, turned the plane upside down, dirt flew all over. He grabbed the stick, brought it around so it wouldn't go in an inverted spin, took us back to the airport, didn't say anything, but he should have said push the stick forward, not pop the stick forward. Consequently, he said, we'll schedule you for another ride, and then he got me another instructor. So those things happen, and so I took to flying very easily. At that time, Korea they were starting to call in soldiers again for Korea, and I thought, if I get drafted, I do not want to go in the infantry in the hole. And okay. So my flying continued. I had a couple of emergency landings on the way to Waterloo, which is north of Cedar Rapids. But we had an instructor aboard, thank goodness. We hit a windstorm, and so consequently we had to fly in a 45-degree angle to keep on course, and so we burned up a lot of fuel and we ran out of gas. And it was on a Sunday afternoon, and so he landed in this cornfield that all the corn had been chopped off, and it was by a little white church out in the middle of absolute nowhere. And the people come running out, and they helped. They drained gasoline out of their car and put it in the airplane, lifted the airplane tail, turned it around, cranked it up, and we flew off to Waterloo. And when we got to Waterloo, it was just raining like crazy. So we had to fly again sideways to even see out because you couldn't see. There was no windshield wipers naturally, and so we couldn't see. So we were grounded in that rainstorm for about 3 hours. So we went to town, got something to eat, came back, and then storms ceased, and we then continued on back to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So we had a lot of training that way, and the training then was different than it is today. Today it's like driving a car when you get a pilot's license. Then they taught you emergency landings and spins and loops and things like that. So on my final FAA instructor ride, I had to go spend an hour doing all kinds of touch and go, emergency, cutoff, etc. to get me certified or get my license. Well, we've climbed way up about 5,000 feet, and then I was to kick it into a spin. Well, I did that, and off we went into the spin, doing 130 mile an hour straight down, and all of a sudden we heard clunk, and so I pulled it back level again, and we checked everything to find out what that was. We couldn't find anything. So we continued with the testing and back to the field with touch and goes. And our parachutes were the old-fashioned kind, that over the shoulder, and it would act as a part of the seat. So anyway, when we landed, we could not get out of the airplane because the vibration had taken the handle and it had come off and slid underneath the seat. So if we'd had emergency, we would be unable to bail out. But anyway, we finally found the handle and got it on, got it out. And so in those days you celebrate. Dr. Prout gave me a quart of Jack Daniels to give the FAA instructor, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. So we celebrated that. And so that day, then when I received my pilot's license, I checked out in 2 aircraft, which is kind of unusual the same day because they're 2 different procedures. One was an Aranca aircraft, and the other was Dr. Prout's Stinson Voyager, 4-place, beautiful airplane.